Our next panel is the Talent and Innovation Agenda for the 21st Century. The session will discuss best practices implemented by GFCC members to foster talent and innovation through infrastructure projects, as well as how to develop a talented workforce for the future economy. It's my pleasure to greet His Excellency Abdullah, Lootah, Secretary General of the Emirates Competitiveness Council, and our panelist, Dr. Ahmad Al-Yamani, Chief Operating Officer at Saudi Technology Development and Investment Company, Mr. Suhail Masri, Vice President of Bait.com, Mr. Ganesh Rasagam, Practice Manager for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the World Bank, Mr. John Larson, Chief Information Officer at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, Dr. Ajay Malshe, Chief Technology Officer of Nanomech. Thank you.
Shukran. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to make one minor remark, is that we're going to lose one important panelist. Dr. Ahmad is going to leave us after he makes a couple of remarks in order for him to catch his flight back to Riyadh. So, Dr. Ahmad, we will miss you, but anyway, I'll give you the chance, inshallah, to make your own remarks. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to moderate this session. Let me speak about the overall session. In particular, this is infrastructure and talent. Infrastructure is a cornerstone of creating a strong and a competitive economy and ensuring a good quality of life. It provides functions such as housing, healthcare, education, roads, communications, technologies to the population. It also facilitates business operations through the movement of goods and services through airports, seaports, rails, and expressways. It is used strategically by governments investing in particular industries. Infrastructure shapes the characters of environments of cities through, for example, the infrastructure of creative environments and social spaces, such as museums, libraries, art institutions, and the like, or the creation of smart cities and places where knowledge is cultivated and shared. Importantly, large-scale infrastructure projects in energy, water, transportation, housing, sanitation, mobility, telecommunications, and more also hold immense potential for job creation and fostering talent. I can think of no better place to be holding this panel than right here in King Abdullah's economic city, with a total development area of more than 173 square kilometers. The city will play an important role in the diversification of the economy of the kingdom by bringing foreign and domestic investments. The city also will help create up to 1 million jobs for the youth of the country, will include a business district as well as an educational zone, industry, light manufacturing, R&D, office space, hospitality, education services, among other things. Zooming out, world infrastructure is ever growing. It is estimated that more than $57 trillion of investment is required for global infrastructure between the years 2013 to 2030. That's nearly 60% more than the $36 trillion spent over the past 18 years, according to the report from McKinsey Global Institute. This does not include costs such as meeting development goals in emerging countries and making infrastructure more resilient to climate change. Talent and innovation are two critical ways in which we can meet the gap in the world's immense infrastructure needs. Today, our esteemed panel of specialists is here to address the role of talent and innovation in the future of the world's infrastructure development. Talent and capabilities are required across the infrastructure value chain, including planning, delivery, and operations. Over the next 40 minutes or so, our panelists will share insights on how the world can meet its infrastructure needs more efficiently through talent and innovation. I will give the floor now for Dr. Ahmad to make a couple of remarks before we hit him with a couple of questions. And maybe the audience will have one question.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll say a few words about what TAQNIA wants to do in relation to the infrastructure development and how to leverage that for a larger economic development in the country. So this company was established particularly to build the infrastructure for two things: technology transfer and technology commercialization in Saudi Arabia. So what we asked ourselves the question at the very beginning: what is it that we need to do so that we set that infrastructure for people to leverage it, whatever they would like to do with technology transfer and technology commercialization? The answer came out in 3 tracks. Am I too, okay, better? Okay. So the answer came out in 3 tracks. The first track is a track that, and it's a technology transfer track. It's a track that sets up joint ventures with technology leaders around the world to set up shops and operations in Saudi Arabia in different areas or different sectors of technology. And these are the sectors that, I mean, the usual or the expected suspects, I would say: water, energy, particularly renewable and mostly solar, material science, because of the petrochemical industry that has already grown substantially in Saudi, ICT, defense, and biotech as areas of national security and basic needs of self-reliance in the country. The joint ventures in these areas should help us establish or transfer some of these technology to the country. The second track is a track of setting up venture capital investment fund, and it's a fund that basically tries to invest in technologies that belong to one of these sectors in a way that can either help this technology get transferred to the country or grow in the country or get linked to a value chain that is relevant to this industry within the country. So it doesn't have, the industry itself, the company itself doesn't have to move, but it has to build, has to connect with a value chain in Saudi Arabia. The third track is a track of inspecting what happens in research centers, because researchers typically do not have in mind a path of converting what they do in the research center into a commercial product. So what we have done is that we've taken that burden off the shoulders of the researchers and the research centers themselves and have established an alliance that is, it's an alliance between Aramco, KAUST, TAQNIA, KFUPM, and RTI, Research Triangle Institute of North Carolina. And the objective of this alliance is to evaluate, assess, develop, scale up all of these potential research projects that happen in research centers. The patents will come from the 3 research centers: KAUST, KFUPM, and KAUST. The funding will come from Aramco and KAUST, and the operations are managed by TAQNIA and RTI. This has happened before in North Carolina, and we're trying to basically replicate the same thing. So if you look at the 3 tracks, you will realize that what's happening is a setup of an infrastructure that will help realize the transformation or the transfer of technology as well as the commercialization of technology. Once these tracks are in a ready state, any company in Saudi, any startup, any few entrepreneurs, any few researchers can basically come up with their ideas and thoughts and take them through the pipeline of this transformation. So that's what we have in mind.
Okay. Let me ask one question, and then I'll leave it to the floor also to ask you a question before you leave. How do you measure, in terms of KPI, these tracks or the initiatives that you guys develop in TAQNIA? How does it operate?
Very
Very
good question. So on the JVs, it's measured by 3 things: the number of jobs that these JVs are going to transfer or are going to create, the quality of these jobs that they're going to create, because the higher up you are in the technical complexity of these JVs, the higher the quality of the jobs that they will create. And keep in mind, everything that we do, all of the JVs that we're currently considering will be at the very top 25 percentile of technology complexity. We're not after things that are simple that the private sector can lead and develop themselves. Looking at ourselves as the technology arm of the sovereign wealth of the country, we try to go after the complex JVs. So the type of the jobs, the number of the jobs, the size of the investment, and the number of the JVs, as well as the coverage of the different sectors that I mentioned. These are the 5 tracks that we measure ourselves against. On the venture capital investment fund, it's basically the size of the invested capital. So the fund is a 500 million real fund, and it's to be invested in Saudi and abroad in these areas of focus. The way we measure ourselves is how much have we invested, not how much have we raised. We're closing the 500 million within the coming few weeks. Before the end of the year, the fund is to be launched. Commercialization is the toughest cookie of the 3. It's actually not easy to take what researchers are doing in their labs and come out with something commercial out of it. It's often a struggle of ownership. It's my idea, it's my baby, it's my thought, and you don't know how to do it and you don't know how to commercialize it. Or it's often, I don't care about commercialization. I'm doing this for the betterment of the world, and I'm a researcher, I'm trying to do that. So why do I care about making a return out of it, a commercial return, that is? So this is, even setting the KPIs for this at this stage of development is actually by the number of products that have been launched. It's not about the size, it's not about the jobs, it's not about the investment. It's how many products have we taken out of a lab and made a commercial value out of it. Okay. So these are the KPIs.
Very good point. Any questions from the floor before Dr. Ahmad leaves? Deborah.
We have this problem in the United States called the Valley of Death. And thank you. We have this problem, the Valley of Death. Plenty of money for the early startup, for the ideation, getting something out of University of Lab, initial investment, high net worth individuals. And then the time comes for the rapid scale-up, either manufacturing facilities, marketing, branding, and the death comes. And we've seen in the U.S. many, many innovations that reach a point where they can't get over that hurdle, and they either atrophy or they end up actually leaving the country with the jobs and the intellectual property. Are you focusing on that valley of death, or is that something you figured out the model how to solve?
Actually, very, very good question. So we have a different valley of death in Saudi Arabia. The valley here is the valley of starting, is actually getting out of the research center into the initial phases of developing that company. So we have a slightly earlier valley of death, and we actually, for the time being, through the commercialization track, live in that valley of death. Our venture capital track is the track that lives in the valley of death that you described, of these companies that could have a potential of growth, but because of one reason or another, they basically hit that valley of death and end up disappearing. The best example of this is Solar Junction. It's a California-based company, and it produced the highest efficiency solar cells for concentrated photovoltaic solar energy. And we ended up acquiring the company 100% because it actually has the highest efficiency in the world, and because of hitting that valley of death, it has reached a situation where it meant something for us to acquire it, both as a commercial opportunity and in terms of a potential for developing it further through the Saudi market and the Saudi solar opportunities that are about to boom. Precisely.
Doctor, can you take one more question?
As the chairman says, we are at his disposal.
You can take one more question,
sure.
please. Fadal.
Khalid Al-Uthman again. In the morning session, I asked about the commercialization possibilities with the universities. It was wonderful to hear about the commercialization efforts in KAUST, but I commented that we need to see or extract the that is happening in other universities. How is TAQNIA? What is TAQNIA doing?
KAUST is by far ahead of
the
other universities in Saudi. We work with, as of today, we work with only 3 research centers, KAUST, KAUST, and KFUPM. The other universities are yet to join the alliance that I mentioned at the beginning, the 6 members alliance. We would love to have all universities in the alliance, but it took us 2 years to ink an agreement because every one of the 6 members is driven by different objectives. So When we got the 6 of them to agree, we decided to launch the alliance, and then in the future launch or include additional industrial players or research centers. But I mean, you're basically right. KAUST is way ahead because it has this at the very beginning of the inception of the university.
Okay. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ahmad for joining us. And thank you very much for adding value to our panel discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Safe flight back home. Okay, my question goes to John. With your experience in education and innovation in technology, what would it take to develop talent for the infrastructure space?
Sure. Just a quick little bit of background on KAUST. Jean-Louis Chameau, our president, is coming tomorrow, but it's important to understand that KAUST was set up not only to do research, discovery research, but applied research. And the very complex infrastructure that was put in place to support KAUST, which includes some of the most incredible lab equipment and capability that you would find at any university around the world, required us to, in essence, build an ecosystem within Saudi Arabia to support and maintain that infrastructure. And that was something that was a surprise to us. Just getting chemicals and biological agents into the country was a real challenge because it was, our import group here was very leery of the types of things that we were bringing in if they didn't fit neatly in the catalog. And we thought we'd take the easy way out and go to the king and say, just give us an exception so that we can, you know, bypass all these rules so we can get our job done. And he, incredible man, said, no, I created you to help solve some of these infrastructure problems. I created you to create the knowledge and the intelligence to support and maintain this infrastructure across the board. And that resonated with us, and that was something that we started doing very early on, not only educating master's and PhD students to do discovery, but also helping companies build the infrastructure that we need and the rest of the country needs to use these very complex tools that are out there. All the way from, you know, being able to move chemicals for our research. Now we're sharing that same infrastructure with other universities and other businesses around Saudi Arabia so that we're all using the standard format and structures and working with the government agencies to improve it. Another interesting infrastructure issue was global connectivity. So we ordered or requested a 10 gigabit circuit back in 2009 to Amsterdam to plug into Internet 2, which is the education network. And the local telephone companies were concerned that we were starting our own telephone company because of the size of the communication. Today, to be a tier 1 research institution, you need to connect Internet 2 at 100 gigabits. And that's not going to end. So this infrastructure that we're building requires very technical capabilities to maintain it, support it, grow it, operate it. And then on top of that, the students and faculty who are doing the research to be able to use that infrastructure and be able to count on it is critical for any tier 1 global research university today.
Thank you very much, John. I'll move from academia to the World Bank Group. Ganesh, with you being the practice manager for innovation and entrepreneurship, can you shed some light on some of the most recent initiatives that you guys have been embarking on, and what do you see in the horizon for talent in the infrastructure space, if you don't mind?
Thank you, Excellency. So if you're wondering what's an international bureaucrat doing on this panel of innovators and private sector movers and shakers, let me try and explain a little bit of what we do in this space. So there are three parts to what we do in the World Bank to support the innovation and entrepreneurship agenda. The first is in helping our client governments to establish the ecosystem for innovation. This is at the policy level, at the institutional level, at the regulatory level, at developing human resources, and so forth. And a lot of this work has been in Eastern Europe, in Latin America, and now increasingly in Africa and Asia as well. The second part of what I manage is this InfoDev program, which maybe some of you may have heard. So through the InfoDev program, we actually support business incubators, business accelerators in many countries in three thematic areas. One is in the area of climate technology, green growth and climate technology. Secondly is in digital technologies, and thirdly in agribusiness. So in these areas, we actually work with the entrepreneurs directly. We provide some funding for pre-seed grants. We help them run boot camps, and we help them to navigate the valley of death, as was highlighted earlier. And this we're doing in a number of countries. The third area is in knowledge and partnerships. And so here we actually partner with other international organizations working in this area. We have a nice partnership with the OECD to establish something called the Innovation Policy Platform, which if you look it up, you can find it's a one-stop shop for information and research on innovation. So that's what we in the World Bank are doing together with other parts of the World Bank. IFC is actually investing in startups and so on. Now, to go back to the question raised by the moderator, I think let me just share one number with you, and if you don't remember anything else that I've said, please remember this number. It's 6.4. So we did a study recently, which will be published soon, to look at what's the market size for clean technology in the developing countries. It's $6.4 trillion over the next 10 years. Now, who's going to meet that demand? That's the question. So the market opportunities are incredible. A big chunk of that market is in infrastructure development. It's developing infrastructure for clean water, for clean energy, for waste management, and so forth. So I think that's something that I want to put up as an opportunity for us to think about and explore. Now the challenges. If you look at the challenges side, now I'll highlight two challenges. Despite all the advances in technology that we know, global productivity is actually slowing down, and many of you probably know this. We look at the rate of productivity growth, TFP growth globally, it's actually declining in the last 10 years compared to the previous decade. Now this is almost counterintuitive, right? You expect the benefits of digital technology to enhance productivity, but it's not evident. And one large aspect of that is a whole lot of SMEs are not benefiting from the advances in digital technology. They don't have access to the infrastructure, they don't have access to the latest technologies, they have challenges in capacity to absorb and modify and adapt these technologies for their own purposes to grow. So this is a challenge that I would like to sort of discuss with you. How can we benefit from all the wonderful technologies that we hear about? How can this benefit SMEs and enable them to grow? Now, the question of talent is key. If you look at what are the reasons why firm productivity is not growing as we expect it to grow, the first one is talent. The challenge for firms to train, to attract, train, manage, and retain talent. I think that's key. So the need to enhance global flows in talents, to open up movement of people and skills globally, I think that's a key challenge that we need to look at. The second challenge is operational efficiency of firms, and this is related to infrastructure. If you look at Africa, for example, where I used to live for a number of years, there are many, many young entrepreneurs with bright ideas. As I spoke at another forum recently, the next Google could potentially come out of Nairobi, just from the sheer talent of people there. But the infrastructure access and the lack of access to global networks hold them back. So that's the second challenge which I would like to highlight. And the third area, of course, is in networking, which I alluded to. You can't have entrepreneurs and innovators working in isolation. that model is the model of the past. The guy in the white coat in the lab, it's about networking, it's about access to global information flows, real-time access to global expertise. So this is one area that we are trying to work with some of the incubators to link them to global networks. So for example, the global network of climate innovation technology centers, and we like to expand that network, working with people like 1776 in US, the US Department of Energy, and so on. So I just want to stop here and highlight some of these areas where we are engaged and the challenges that all of us are facing.
Sure. Thank you, Ganesh. I would like to move to the ground and getting closer to the youth. My question is to Suhail. Being the vice president for Bait.com, do you think that the youth actually see all these opportunities that are available in the region, or is there a gap between what's there or what the governments and the enterprise are willing to invest in and provide, and the youth aspirations and willingness to do something?
Sure. Thank you for your question. Actually, with the emergence and the development of large-scale infrastructure projects, I believe a new set of skills are in demand also. So these projects are providing huge opportunities for, talents around the world, whether in, the regular businesses that like finance, IT, and for more specialized jobs. In a poll, a survey called Skills and Hiring Trends in the MENA region, this poll has been published early this year, and it sheds interesting light on the opportunities that offered to youth as a result of this changing in industries. And the first one of these opportunities is the shorter recruiting cycle. 50% of people responded to this survey said that it took us less than 1 month to fill a position at our companies. And this by itself will create more opportunities for youth to find jobs and to compete on positions posted. The second one is more jobs in the SME sector, because although those mega projects will provide a huge opportunity, also this will create more jobs in the SME sectors because of contractors, suppliers, etc. And according to the latest MENA job index, 70% of professionals said that the trend is positive, and they believe that companies will hire in the coming 12 months. And the most sought positions that they were talking about, junior and middle executives at that level. The third point is more jobs for women. And this is really important subject that we should stop at. 55% of working women in the Middle East believe that a successful career is a source of happiness for them. And this is part of a survey called the Status of Working Women in the Middle East. And we all know that this region is becoming more diversified, and we see more women are taking important positions in this community. The last point that also is important to mention, the increased reliance on transferable skills. And this is by itself, this is the arsenal actually to ensure candidates' marketability, because again, now moving from the traditional industries to new industries, this would require more skilled people. And in the survey, the same survey, they mentioned that the 3 most required skills, regardless the industries, are first the problem solving and analytical thinking, creativity, and leadership. So I believe maybe we'll talk later about how the role of the private sector and the government and the policy makers in formalizing, and bridging the gap between what's required and what we have in terms of skills at the marketplace.
Thank you, Suhail. I'll take it to someone who sleeps, who breathes technology. Ajay, you're the founder and the Chief Technology Officer of Nanomech. What would it take for our youth in the region to look at emerging technologies, such as the nanotechnology and so on and so forth? We've been hearing about them throughout the day. What are the best practices of ensuring that our youth do comprehend and do pursue emerging technologies from your point of view?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, I would like to thank organizers, you, Prince Saud, Deborah, Jim, for me to be here. It's glad to be here. First time I'm visiting the country. So I would say salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
This is something, a topic very close to my heart. And I founded Nanomech after being a faculty. So I have seen the academia and I have seen the business side. And I wear sometimes both hats, and this is the question aligned with that roles, both roles. First thing I have always found out that young people are ready to take risk. And more than always, I have found out that when a child or a young student in the class are asking the question that, can I do it? Somebody said, no, it has not been done before, don't worry about it. And that is the spark that you're just about to ignite and you just stop for a moment. And it is something very important for me to tell that for young mind, what you all just spoke today, I really wish that every young person can hear this in real time. Because what I have found out more times, that what we do not unleash is the power of imagination. And really, it starts with imagination. I left India to come to the United States, that is my homeland, for one reason only, that is imagination. I had no reason, actually. So the power of imagination is very fundamental to human race. And I believe that first thing what we need to do is to unleash the power of that imagination. Second thing, that we should not penalize people for failing. Because I'm a parent. I pray that my children should not fail, but I know fundamentally in my heart that failure will teach me more things than my successes. And so risk is very fundamental, another thing, to the success, and failure is equally. As long as that failure will teach you something and you rise above that, and that is just part of the natural process. So I would suggest in the system, if you can integrate the part of taking that risk and allow it to fail. And I have seen in the United States many a time, the investors would ask you, did you fail and what do you learn from that? I'm born in the country, India, where if you fail, you're history. You have no chance to succeed. So I've seen the both sides of the world, very different. Once you have a risk, once you have an imagination, the third thing is your human hands. And every time I see people on the computer constantly, I find this very, on one side, communication is important, but I had just recently done some analysis. I mean, imagine that 3 billion people are connected on the Facebook. If each of that person is distracted with 5 minutes only in the daily schedule, just 5 minutes, very, very modest, you have 15 billion minutes distraction. Now count that in number of productivity days, that how many wealth, how much GDP is lost just by 5 minutes of distraction. Now if you think around that line, imagine those 5 minutes are engaged in making something. It could be cooking a barbecue. It could be in a wood shop making something. If you like to make something knit with your hand, or you could be in a machine shop, machining something, manufacturing something. The word, people use the word manufacturing quite a bit, but I'm not sure everybody understands. Manu means hand, and fractura means making. And I'm a physicist by all my training. I had no mechanical engineering training, but I just love mechanical devices. I love to play with it, break it sometime, but make it again. So making it with your both hands, because I will tell you fundamentally, cognitively, when your hands work with your brain, you learn better. My mother always told me, Ajay, write it down. Always would remember. And think about it. So if you make it with your hand, you will learn better. And I find this now today's in the education system, there are less and less classes of making the things with the hand and more on the computer modeling. I see great papers published just by computer modeling. Beautiful, colorful picture, but nothing being manufactured. And countries, GDP like Saudi Arabia, I believe, or any part of the world would grow because of making something. Otherwise, between businesses, beers, books, there wouldn't be any left. We would be all doing digitally and nothing really.
Okay. Very interesting. I would like to ask more questions about the environment that you were raised in that led to you being there, but we'll take, I don't want to confiscate the questions. Now that I finished with the panelists, I would like to give the floor the chance to ask questions. If you can direct the question to the panelists, and then I'll go back for round 2 of questions if we have time. So please, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you for the panel. and Dr. Ajay, I think this question you will help the rest of the panel to answer, but please let me ask you the fundamental question again when it comes down to economics. Do we support, as a panel of educators and innovators, state education from primary, secondary, all the way up to higher education, or is there more efficiency in more private sector higher education? I come from a country where there is about 20,000 primary and secondary schools that graduate about or have about 10 million students in them. We have 18 public universities that graduate about 2.5 million people on an annual basis from different sectors. But we see what is happening in Egypt in terms of talent and innovation. There's been a deterioration of that throughout the past 30 years. Now, again, if we look at it from a basic economic perspective, what would your advice be for a country that has so many young people? And that's why I'm saying, Doctor, you'd be able to help me, because you come from a country that, dwarfs the 80 million that we have and the number that I've just stated in state education. So again, my question here on competitiveness, talent, and innovation. What is the right way to go forward for a country like India, like Egypt, with large populations, state education or private education, higher education? I believe in secondary and primary education being free or state subsidized. But what about higher education? Can that make the difference between a country being competitive, innovative, and create talent? Because I'm seeing in my own country that our universities do not fit anywhere in the global competitiveness of education. So please, gentlemen, thank you.
Would you mind? Of course.
Question goes to you. Are you a product of state, state
I will
education?
tell you, when I was studying in India, I had the biggest limitation probably out of my all classroom. Because first, I don't like to remember the things, because my brain should be used for more important things than just memorizing. Otherwise, I can look in the dictionary, I don't need it. So, but I have always difficulty remembering equations after equations, chemical formulas after formulas. And my classroom was doing it pretty well. They would remember for a week, and after that, they would forget about it. And I would take time to derive it. So in the exam, I would come home and my mom said, "How did you do in the exam?" I said, "I derived it well." She said, "No, do you remember?" I said, "I didn't, but I just derived it well." And so I always had a difficulty in memorizing the thing because I didn't like that whole idea. So education could be a very highly memory-driven, where you are challenged to remember, but you are not using your hand to prove it. And I was pretty good in that. When I came to United States, I remembered the learning is project-based. When you ask me to make any project, I have made water filters. There's a fantastic, in Bangladesh in the water, there is arsenic, a large amount of arsenic. So can you design a multi-stage filters? And I had a classroom, I gave that as a project. There was a very nice award. In fact, one of the faculty at Georgetown received it. So I liked that project. I gave it in my class. When my students build that filter to remove components like arsenic, they learn far more than that was in the textbook, because remember, textbook is a book of history. What they are going to do is the future. And the history would only rhyme, but it would not repeat. So project-based learning has taught me far more than memorization-based. I almost feel sometimes I wasted that time in my life. Thank you.
Any more questions to the floor, please, to the panelists? Please specify the panelists in specific. Deborah, please.
Ajay, you talked about imagination. You talked about imagination. And can you share with us your concept of what's the difference between imagination and creativity? And how can we collectively begin to inspire imagination in young people? And what should we be doing in our homes, and in our schools, and in our communities to have an imagination revolution?
You know, it's a very tough question, Deborah. Like always, you ask very tough questions. So this is a tough question. And I'll give you my version. I know my fellow colleagues here, they probably have a different. And I will give you an example because examples speak. So imagination is something that I love music. So I always feel that imagination give you a beautiful lyrics. Or I'm walking something, I'm exercising, I'm doing something, and suddenly an idea strikes me. And I believe that that is an imagination that it just come to you because who you are, how you have thought, and how you just came to you. I remember this movie, Amadeus Mozart. He's looking at this most complex symphony written by the courtier musician, and he just takes it, reassembles the notes, and it becomes one of the most simplistic part of that symphony. It's so beautiful. So imagination is something that I believe is, I would use a word that it come to you as, you can say, God-given gift, or it is just you're gifted. Because everybody is talented with something. Some are good in cooking, some are good in running, everybody is mostly are gifted. So imagination is part of who you are fundamentally. Now creativity, I believe, is challenged by difficulties. Because when I'm in the real difficult situation, my mind is connecting all the dots in my brain with my environment to come up with an idea that how desperately, so excellent innovation that my colleagues and I contributed, nano lubricant, was actually the result of that. One of the companies, I had early in I wrote one of the grants, I got $350,000. I approached a company to sell me nanoparticles of lubricants, and they told me that they can only sell me 1 gram. Now here I have money and I have no material to work with. I was in trouble now. So I really ran through that difficult situation and really transformed that, worked with some of the best students and businessmen, people like Jim, to make that product into a reality. But that is a creativity. Again, it is my version, but I believe imagination and creativity have their own places in the society and in the education.
Okay. If there are no more questions, I'll continue the dialogue. So building on that particular dialogue that Deborah and Ajay started, I'll go to John Larson. We have government officials attending this session. If there are asks from the likes of King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, you guys are one of the top tier institutions for research and development. What are the asks, what are the demands that you have to ensure that your students and your faculty are there and are competing with the best in the world? So demand and maybe your wishes would come true.
Sure. First of all, it's very competitive to get into KAUST. We accept less than 5% of the applicants. One of the really interesting things that we're quite proud of is that 30% of our students are women. So if you go to most technical schools, Caltech, MIT, you'll be lucky to get 5, 10, 15% of the student body women. And we're finding is that this, especially here in Saudi Arabia, gives women a great opportunity to stay here, study, grow, and then use what they learn back into industry and technology companies that are interested. So one of the women graduates from the master's program, we did an internship in the IT group, and now she's working number of SABIC in particular as a researcher, and then coming back to get her PhD. So there's real opportunity there. Now, so what